Oracle of the Forgotten, The Humans, Rise Before the Fall, Part 5. Arden eventually revealed that he was certain what he was looking for was not here. They would need to travel further. Still, it took him some time to tell the woman that he was being hunted and on the bounty list of some of the greater beings in both the light and dark realms. She had been trying for some time to get him to open up. Normally, that would bring exactly the opposite with him. Arden seemed unfazed, as if it were just a normal thing to be targeted by powerful entities. She couldn't help but suspect that he'd been hunted more than a few times over his life. Another part of her was starting to suspect he had been around a bit longer than it seemed. Aelynn's response was that it sounded fun. Being hunted meant that they would have to catch or remove the hunters before they eliminated either of them. In truth, her comment was more about hiding her own confusion. He seemed a relatively decent person, and she found herself all too curious why the man had managed to end up on such a list in the first place. What she said next was a bit more confusing for him, as he hadn't mentioned much about where they were going. I'm curious, how did on a list of someone with enough power to rule over a place that can only be reached by arcane blood portals? Even she realized this question was a strange one. She knew something of it, from a book maybe, or it was a deeper sort of knowing. She always assumed the books she read were the source first. The story he kept sharing with her seemed oddly familiar, and she was eager to want to know everything she could about this man and his enemies. The more she learned about his turning back to hunt those who wished him dead, the more intrigued she was. If anything, she found herself wanting to see that battle. He suggested she may learn more if she could stay the course, especially as lists like the one he found himself on faded from existence for the most part. She realized she was cocky herself when the words slipped past her lips. I've made more of a hobby of angering overly self-important kings, if they should even be called that, hiding behind greater men than themselves. She knew all too well her angering them had led to more than one death, and would probably bring many more. For the first time, she realized a small issue with her choice. If she did not fight to stay alive, he would learn her secret, one she had to keep from all others. Those changes? No, it was best she simply stay alive at this time. There's something behind the spire. The fact was, she wasn't sure if she'd caught it with her eye, or just sensed it in the distance. The sharp rock outcropping was like a black obelisk in the distance. It was strange, different from that around it. She wasn't exactly sure why this one was different either. There were several in the distance, but it was her own senses warning her of the In fact, what lurked nearby was a group of demon soldiers. They were resting themselves as they waited to see if they could catch sight of those who had escaped from the nearby palace. The man had his own unnatural senses. If anything, hers were almost too similar. Her eyesight was nearly as good as some of the youngest elves. A little odd considering her age, but it wasn't impossible. Still, he didn't seem to give any indication that he was surprised by her ability. Rather, he just nodded at what she had mentioned and then continued to walk forward. Confidence or folly? Aelynn was curious if he simply had no concern for the waiting army. She realized that so far he'd had no difficulty taking on any group they'd encountered. This wasn't likely to go any different for them. What she hadn't seen coming nor expected was a strange bird that flew overhead. a creature that shouldn't be able to fly, composed of bone, broken and burnt feathers. The bird itself let out a scream that sounded like dozens of screams blended together. Men, women. It felt like an odd mixture of both, captured at the moment of their deaths. To most, it would be horrifying. To her, it was simply a curiosity. However, her enhanced hearing left a sharp pain filling her head. She knew better than to deafen herself entirely, but covered one ear to try to block the sound out. Her other hand still rested on her blade. To the mortal, it was an eerie reminder of a breed he thought was extinct by now. Its own cries were answered by a loud roar from behind the rocks. The first man to step out was only a little taller than Arden, appearing mostly mortal other than bones and bits of flesh sticking out from the gaps in his armor. In fact, had it not been clearly from his own body, they might have even been mistaken for decoration. Arden didn't seem all that surprised. He couldn't help but notice the reactions of the woman. Her confident stance wasn't wavering, but it seemed that the variety of creatures they were now encountering was taking some getting used to. As the first man demanded to know who they were and why they'd come, both Arden and Aelynn were more than aware of the two more walking from behind the stones, and another pair were quickly circling around, hoping to remain unnoticed as they closed in behind them. The tone of the bird annoyed the human rather than intimidating him in any way. The demons couldn't help but notice his disregard for their monster. It was also hard for them to ignore that the human didn't even bother to draw his blade. Most were unsettled by it. Even their own kind hated these flesh beasts. Arden decided to see if they could get out of wasting the energy and time on a fight. He didn't feel it would be difficult to resolve if they did choose violence, though. My business is not with you. If you tell me where the lord of this realm is, we'll be on our way. My business is with them. The human's cold and uncaring tone was almost too calm for the demon. Still, the demon looked him over slowly before demanding to know what he had brought them. He wouldn't see a mortal. Maybe if it entertained him for a moment. He shrugged before looking over the woman. For a price, I might be able to help you find your way, or you can return with me to the eatery. Aelynn felt a strange sort of chill now. She knew of this place, not the one they'd left, but something bigger and likely more cruel. Even so, she didn't know why that would be. The demon stated that the travelers held something valuable, though. The woman didn't even respond. She was getting a little too used to others acting like she was some kind of object. Even before this realm, it wasn't too uncommon. If anything, it only made her want to prove to them that she was actually a threat. No loyalty to your lord? The human was curious now. He had seen the loyalty of the people of his realm vary by their own desires. However, he wasn't sure if this one had any honor left, or if he was willing to put his own plans ahead of his master. If you don't want the ones behind the rock to die first, you'd be wise to choose your next words carefully. The demon wasn't sure if he should be more impressed by the mortal's ability to know where his men were, or the words that followed. Come, I'll entertain you here and now. The human seemed to be more than aware of his ability. He didn't yet raise a hand to his blade, Rather, he took a heavy and slow step towards the other man to gauge his response. Loyalty is earned, and reaching my men would be impressive from where you're standing. The demon had plenty of questions of his own, but admitting that wasn't exactly on his list. We are not well paid. You coming from the lesser eatery, though, without injuries? Maybe it was amusing for a short time. He didn't care now. He wanted to look over the pair again before he spoke up. We do not like ones like you, or her, but maybe if you give her over, we could proceed. Aelynn was tired of holding her tongue. If death is your chosen direction. It was a caution, and she wasn't sure if she meant at the hand of the human or herself anymore. She had long since grown tired of men like this. Demon or not, it was an attitude she wanted to end. Hush, child, no one was talking to you. Let me speak with the man. The demon's sudden snapping at her only made it worse. She wanted to hold back and let the mortal speak. It didn't stop the narrowing of her eyes, nor the obvious flicker of loathing that was starting to shadow her own features. She kept from drawing her blade, but only by the sheer force of will at this point. No, it wasn't time. Not yet. Arden was already bored with this. It wasn't a new pattern for demons, and his blade had been longing for a taste of their blood. Rather than strike first, he rested his sword against his shoulder. The air around him was colder suddenly, as if his own aura chilled it slightly. He would never admit to a side of him that was agitated by the way this creature was speaking with the girl. He didn't have time for the nonsense, nor to analyze what any of that meant. It wasn't important to his quest anyway. Then proceed, demon. The human figured the discussion was already over. It would either be some long-winded request or some other distraction from this creature, their kind all too predictable. The air around them all seemed to shift for a moment. As Aelynn watched the demon lunge toward Arden, she felt her mind yelling now. Is he even trying? Does he look down on him that much? She figured the demon would get what he deserved, much more quickly than others if he kept acting this way. Arden had stayed perfectly still. He already knew what was about to happen. The demon had made a grave mistake, leaving himself wide open. The human suddenly moved to the side, his arm swinging the blade quickly from his back, downwards, piercing the creature's midsection. The blade slammed the creature backwards and down, pinning him to the ground with the force of a single movement. The human took a slow breath before kicking the demon's sword away from him. Well, that was boring. The stance of the mole seemed all too casual for the situation, but he had everything well in hand. Seeing their leader fall, the two men called out to the others in the distance. One of the demons rushed the mortal, pulling an axe from his back before launching himself in the man's direction. Aelynn saw the other turn to run towards her, probably because the two were closer to the same size. A slight grin met her lips as she dodged his attack, stepping easily to the side before drawing her own blade. She didn't like to admit it, but she was honestly just wanting the chance to have a decent fight. She hoped he could deliver. She had just enough time to dodge his second attack before spinning herself around the demon and slashing the entire length of his back with a single strike. The man with the axe didn't seem to hear his master telling them both to stop. Rather, he just continued his own sweeping attack. To his surprise, the mortal simply rushed underneath the strike. He lunged in closer, punching the demon straight in the jaw and knocking him away from the both of them. It wasn't long before the human had a hand back on the hilt of his sword and knelt down to look into the eyes of the demon pinned beneath it.
I can kill you right now, and no one will bat an eye. But if you give me what I want, you can continue your miserable, immortal life until I decide to take it for myself. Arden knew that whatever the creature decided, he would have his way in the end. Aelynn moved closer, letting herself in to see what was happening between the two. Even so, she didn't fully take her attention off the two nearby guards. She didn't want to let down her own guard. We don't die, not like your kind. The demon seemed to lock on the human before taking a moment to glance at the girl. There was something about her he couldn't place, but it didn't matter. Their master could sort this out instead. Our Lord is in the high tower past the ritual stones. Follow the trail if you dare. It seemed too easy, but perhaps they simply had decided to let the pair go. It wouldn't be the first time. Arden has seen these so-called warriors step down, if even slightly injured. This wasn't any different. Another sharp command from the demon on the ground had his guards back off entirely. Before long, the creature struggled to his feet. He did nothing to stop Arden and Aelynn from leaving. As they continued to walk away, she decided to speak up again. I'm guessing they aren't used to people like you. He was scared. It was a simple enough observation, but the human seemed to dismiss it. The demon had been afraid of him. She could sense it, almost taste it, yet somehow he didn't even seem to notice it for himself. Didn't know. Never do. Fear is unnatural to many, but a mortal can't be intimidating without more. His words were a bit confusing to her. She was technically long-lived to the point many of her kind were considered to be immortal as well. But she had seen how much this mortal could push and drive others to fear. He didn't seem to recognize his own power, or maybe he just didn't care. If anything, she wasn't certain of it at all. Some part of her silently screamed that she knew his power, and others would too. But that part was so new that she didn't want to listen to it. It seemed more like a distraction than anything. As they continued along the path, their conversation quickly dropped. Both had become lost in their own minds and were walking quickly to pass through the wasteland faster. She sighed softly, then spoke up again. Mortals can be intimidating if they know their worth. The village here seemed familiar, but her mind wouldn't let her grasp why. She dismissed it, though, before looking across the distance. This realm was one of the older demon realms. She couldn't quite remember where. All she knew is this was actually one of the better parts of that region. She'd given up by now trying to understand her strange sense of awareness. It wasn't worth the energy to fight with anymore. Arden didn't truly believe that humans were all that intimidating to immortals, even when he had seen them beg for their lives in his own past. After all, they were always telling him that he was nothing, worthless, that his efforts were empty and would do nothing. The air was heavier now, almost as if the gravity had changed. The world around them was changing too. It was difficult to walk towards this tower, probably a magical mechanism to slow down enemy advances.
To him, it was going to simply be a chance to push himself harder. Oddly, the same energy didn't really seem to trouble the girl much. It was as if certain things just didn't sway her attention at all. Was she immune to them due to her own blood, or was it something else? The woman she had claimed to be from his past was the same way, easily navigating the demon realms as if she had been a natural part of them. "Does your enemy have a name?" If anything, she was trying to silence her mind and move it elsewhere. The fact the area was growing more and more familiar was nearly unnerving to her. She just wanted to see something other than vague visions, and even hearing the slaughter of these villagers who were long departed from the lands. She'd not had troubles with visions in some time, but maybe it was just this place that brought them to her. Kareg. In our language, it means the color of killers or something of the sort. The mention of the name seemed to draw the warmth from him, but it also radiated some strange energy the girl couldn't quite place. For him, it emboldened him. He could feel a strength within. Resolution, rage. He felt the need to destroy things. He wished to feast upon his enemies, tear them apart, watch them fall to the ground. Anything that tried to stop him, no matter what side it was on, would be trampled beneath his feet. The undying flame that felt like ice and fire in the same moment was flowing through his veins. Not yet, mortal. Now is not the time to lose yourself. The voice. His old friend in the blade was sometimes the only reason left within him in these moments. Yet it was a solemn guide, and he trusted it completely. The shift in Arden left a cold chill in Aelynn. She could feel it moving, the way the energy transformed into something colder, more angry than before, something so hungry. You hunt the one who ripped the wings from the angels. Her eyes closed as she paused a moment. She didn't seem to change the pace of her steps, but she was definitely feeling something. The worst is, they betrayed their own just as easily. I hope he bleeds. The words were not something she expected from her own lips as she opened her eyes. She was feeling angry now, beyond anger, as her eyes centered on the horizon. She was trying to find a way to soothe herself. Over the hill was a battlefield. Later it became a place of sacrifice. Hundreds of thousands butchered in a horrific display of... Why did it matter? Why did it come to her now, and why did she pause? The woman wasn't even sure at this point. The blood that tainted the ground, the decay that still filled the air. Hundreds of thousands had become millions, and the suffering continued to this day. The woman set a hand to her temple a moment, rubbing her head lightly as she tried to erase these thoughts again. Her knowledge of a place that he was sure she'd never been impressed him, yet he said nothing about it. He was more focused on how the leader of this land would do more than just bleed. However, the scent of the land ahead had now hit him as well. Right now, nothing mattered but the destination. The battlefield below was scarred by magic and fire. Despite the occasional bits of grass, the remains of the fallen were scattered about or burned on an occasional pyre nearby. The entire area was filled with dark symbols, and the ritual grounds themselves were centered on a raised area of land nearby. The mud was mostly a mixture of rain and blood. Everything about the land felt wrong to the elf. Aelynn had hoped that somehow they'd cleaned up the region. Still, she knew this was an odd form of maintenance of the old magic here. She just didn't know what it was until she spoke up again. They took everything, even the ones who maintained the slaughter, but I don't think the death ever quit. The fact that she was just saying things now was so frustrating to her. She couldn't stand it anymore. Beyond here, I imagine the place was beyond here, but the dead don't stay that way. He killed the ones who caused this, but... No, she knew who tried to cleanse this land, the moment her eyes fell on the man next to her. You were here before. She could see him. Everything was killed. The innocent, the guilty. There was some growing rage in her as she watched him. The amount of death that was filling the valley, the energy of the damned and cursed was all that seemed to exist now. In the distance she could see the flickering of a tower fading in and out of reality. She knew that there was more answers in the depths of her mind. It's broken. If the tower moves, kill one of the keepers here. It will fix itself in place for a very short time. He realized her ramblings were more like the oracle's, and wondered a moment what he had gotten himself into. But when she mentioned the keepers, he didn't care anymore. All he wanted was to find one so they could continue their journey. He was beyond the reach of the haunting now. Death, prayers, screams. The dull ache in his chest was the only vague reminder that there were ties here to his past. Ties he didn't even care to remember anymore. For the first time in so many ages, the eldest voice within her spoke instead. The words were old, perhaps even older than where they stood. She muttered quietly as she assessed the situation. The language was lost to her mind, but such ancient things easily woke a keeper nearby. The beast moved from one of the nearby piles of flesh, pulling itself up slowly. It didn't even have time to move past that, though, as the woman raised her bow and shot it down quickly. The blood was enough to light the symbols along the paths. The light flowed to the center of the field, where a single beam of red flowed outwards towards the tower. For a moment, the tower flickered again before a path to it connected to the one near the edge of the field. It doesn't ever last long. How fast are you, warrior? It was her voice, but the words were the older version of herself. The spell couldn't last long, and she knew that time before the tower phased back out was only moments, at best. She'd drawn the creature from its hiding place using the old tongue. He recognized it only vaguely. The blade seemed to pick up on it faster, muttering something in the same tongue. While he was interested in her apparent knowledge, he wasn't honestly interested in a fight with something like this. This was just more delays in his travel. After so many times, he wanted an end more than he wanted to continue these petty challenges. He decided to tell her that it was hers to deal with, as she seemed to know what she was doing and how to go about it. A part of him also knew this was yet another chance to see if she could manage herself in these smaller fights. In the large battles to come, he would not be able to focus on helping anyone. She explained the tower, that it could only stay anchored to the land for a very short time. For some reason, she felt that she wanted to be there to seek vengeance for an old friend. She just knew there was no way she could explain that. She could feel lifetimes of memories flooding together. It was far easier to focus on fighting than her own mind. It wasn't long before she'd moved across the mass of waste towards the beast. As she approached it, it let out a nearly deafening scream. Whatever possessed Aelynn in that moment left her entirely uncaring of the beast and the bodies attached to it that grasped and clawed at her. Her strikes against the creature had left blood sprayed across herself, the sacrifice grounds, and the nearby stones. It hadn't taken her long to dodge the large, clawed bone mace that swung at her. She was pleased to find that there were no current living sacrifices, but she knew it only meant they'd used the ritual grounds very recently. The elf found herself grouped by some of the many grasping hands emerging from the piles around her. They threw her into a mostly rotten stack of corpses a short distance away. Somehow she managed to find something that felt familiar. She placed her sword away and grasped at the one she had found with 2 hands. She drew the sword out. It was red and gold. It seemed familiar, but she didn't care. All that mattered to her was the weight of the double blade and that it would cut much faster than the one she'd previously held. It seemed she was nearly flying from the decaying pile she was standing in. Both hands grasped the sword as she followed her jump into a quick strike. The creature had managed to dodge her attack from above, but only barely. It muttered in its own tongue, words neither of the mortals could truly understand. Really, neither seemed to care that the creature was thinking or saying. The woman's new sword seemed to draw streams of blood where her own had hardly made the creature bleed. The ritual stones had finally activated enough that they began to draw in the blood and bodies from around them. In fact, even the blood on her armor and body began to remove itself from her as she continued to fight the abomination. Even so, there was not enough. With so few sacrifices, the woman realized there was only one option left. She rushed the beast, running forward to slice away its head with such a simple precision. When she landed again, it was next to the altar, her fingers tangled in the hair of the creature. She dropped the head like it was nothing more than a rotten apple, letting it fall to the altar below. Her still lowering hand began to glow red as she muttered the last of the words she somehow knew would anchor that tower to this realm. As the tower began to fade back into view, deeper tendrils reached for the body that had fallen nearby. They dragged it up through the air and then onto the altar itself. Aelynn stepped back, watching the process with morbid curiosity now. The altar had begun to grow sharp hooks and barbs, already prepared for the brutal removal of any parts of the sacrifice that it would need. She began to back slowly away, retreating quietly towards the path where the humans stood. A few moments later, she began to run. The tendrils started to wrap around every body or bit of flesh that it could reach in the field. As the tendrils started to chase after the elf, they consumed everything that they could along the way. She was fast, probably to her fortune, as she barely managed to escape the circle itself. A flash of light had prevented the tendrils from leaving the sacrificial field. A part of her didn't care if she was not able to make it to that tower, as long as the human made it. She knew that he needed to make it, but had no idea why. Arden had taken her at her word. As soon as the building became solid, so did his resolve. He had already started moving towards the tower. It was hard not to notice the banners made of flesh and bone of those who had come before. The man was already mostly to the door when he felt, more than saw, the blue-haired woman running after him. Somehow, she didn't register as a threat. It wasn't the first time he noticed this, but he was fully aware of that now. Once in the tower, it was all too easy to notice how quiet it was. Walking down the hall, there were no guards, no patrols, just eerie silence in the stone room where they stood. It was Aelynn who found herself most uneasy. Places like this always have guards. This is strangely quiet. The fact was that some part of her knew this was beyond the usual. Demon lords loved their praise. She was mostly thinking aloud when she told him that there must be somewhere that is dedicated to either this demon's rule or worship. Towards the end of the hall was a room that somehow fit the bill. There was a set of crystal and glass panes in this room, telling ancient tales. One panel showed the blood-stained ritual altar. It was nearly identical to the one they had left behind. The thing that drew Aelynn's attention was a single statue. The demon was massive, crushing its enemy beneath its feet as it held up a single mortal in its hands. A mortal with an all-too-familiar blade. Arden was noticing it as well, but he mostly seemed a bit disgusted by it. Aelynn figured that he was just angry over this like so many others, until a voice whispered in her mind that all the man hated more than his own past was when it was misrepresented by others. That never happened. His voice was clear but quiet. He didn't care if anyone heard or not. Instead of speaking more, he drew his blade suddenly, throwing it in a swift spin through the air. The sword sliced the statue in half, which then crushed down upon itself as if it had been hit with an impossible force. Never happened. Those who survived the old wars were so afraid of things people would say about. A sound made her pause. Something had moved nearby. It wasn't the only reason for her pause, though. She had just realized which story this was, and who the story was talking about. The human, if this was the same mortal. Her mind scattered for a brief moment, and she dragged it back to the present quickly. It's too quiet. Do you think they knew that we were coming here? Of course, she figured they would have known. If they thought Arden was the one from that old story, they also would have hidden themselves. She called out into the room that if someone didn't appear, she would begin breaking everything. The small voice of a child spoke from the corner, telling her if they broke the things, the owner of this place would hurt the servants. Still, she seemed utterly indifferent, telling this child that she didn't care if they were hurt or even killed. She needed them to find her someone useful to talk to. The voice itself seemed to fall silent after her demands. Strange enough if it were a child, but she never felt it was. It wasn't long before the flow of shadows suddenly rushed past her. The energy went straight for the human, solidifying in front of him to strike at him with a rather large hammer. In almost an instant, the human had raised his hand. The sword flew back to him, sweeping into his hand at the perfect moment. The second his fingers wrapped around the hilt, the blow from the hammer crashed down upon it. The hammer had hit hard, but the mortal pushed the assailant back away from himself. The entity had not fully formed yet, but Arden was already prepared for another attack. Want to try that again, Shadow? He wasn't in the mood to play games. His blade, though, seemed to be already humming slightly at the idea of a proper battle. The stranger stretched his wings and then his entire body before resting the hammer over his shoulder. He finally came into the form of a proper demon before letting his black eyes settle on the mortal. Despite his hair, eyes, and wings all being black, there was a strange white glow within his eyes, seeming to almost pulse as he watched the human before him. Faster than I expected. Why are you here? The immortal had been watching, If anything, he was a little confused by the fact they hadn't noticed him nor his people nearby. The woman was tired of being ignored, but as this quest really wasn't hers, she was starting to almost not mind it too much. She would deal with things as they come. After all, this gave her plenty of chance to observe. If you are who I believe you to be, then I want what you have. Arden's armored gauntlet pointed towards the man before he stabbed his own blade into the ground. He wasn't keen on negotiation, but if this was faster, he was willing to accept it. The Archstone, to the Citadel of Eldenaris. Give it to me. I have business with the angels. Eldenaris, you come to the house of a demon lord, wanting to go and visit the angels? The creature was honestly bemused now. If anything, it was difficult for him to not laugh at such an absurd request, even if he did have the object that was being required. Do you have anything for me? Such a valuable prize deserves a reward. Mortals in his palace were always a rare treat, but this one seemed more skilled than the ones who had come before him. It was hard not to be amused by the woman's silence as well. She seemed to know her way around, and despite her attempt to stand back, it was clear she felt all too comfortable in his realm. He really couldn't be bothered to check her energy. The mortal was the greatest concern. An elf like herself was rare, certainly. She might even fetch a decent price later. How about the heirloom of a demon lord from ancient past? Would it suffice? Arden noticed the glance that the demon had given Aelynn. It wasn't exactly hard to see what he was thinking. It didn't matter to him, or at least he kept telling himself that this wasn't his business. The man reached into his pouch, drawing from it something larger than it should be able to hold, and held it in his hand with a wry grin. The broken axe of Demon Lord Graeneral. That is a thing no mortal should possess. The demon's gaze locked entirely on the artifact before trying to feign his own disinterest in it. He glanced at the others in the room a moment before looking at the human again. An artifact for an artifact seems enough. Leave it on the altar, and I will get you what you are seeking. The demon honestly didn't care about the room now. Rather, he had heard legends about that axe, and that it could win more power and authority than the ridiculous stone he had stolen off someone ages ago. If you attempt to deceive me, mortal, it will take something else of value. Before long, the creature had opened up a portal, only large enough for the stone itself. He reached his magic outwards, pulling the stone from within it. Even though small to demons and angels, it was the size of a book. Deep blue with strangely golden writing upon it, it seemed to glow to the woman nearby. The human was less concerned about the magic. Only concern he had was that it would take them to where he wanted to be. Aelynn's eyes were on the portal. She felt that the small openings like that were something she should be able to make easily, something she knew she'd made many times. The demon had zero desire to touch that stone ever again. Angelic devices seemed to burn his flesh, as they had the first time he stole it. He could hardly remember that day, but the stories of the axe were rushing through his mind like a whirlwind. It was a true treasure, and such a little thing that the mortal asked in return. Perhaps you should speak the truth of demonkind's history. Maybe then he could truly understand the meaning of power. The mortal let a more smug grin touch his lips now. If anything, he knew their history better than they had. The hidden time he had spent with and without the lost goddess was something he chose not to speak about. If they had forgotten, that was their peril. The archstone Kareg. The human laid out the large axe on the altar. If anything, he knew this was a dangerous trade, but it didn't matter to him. The blade was ready, as always. As many of the old battles, the one he had spoken of had been devastating for the demons and his entire realm at the time. Demons will always remain superior to those we crushed ages ago. The demon lord shrugged. At the moment, he didn't care for the human's words. He only wanted that axe. The stone floated through the air towards the human before lowering itself to the ground at his feet. As it did, Aelynn moved closer to Arden, wishing to be ready to go more than anything else. Careful of the company you keep, princess. Where some go, only the dead follow. The demon felt that he had nothing more to fear. With the axe in his possession, he was well on his way to rising among the ranks of his own kind. He only needed the proper chance now. He could spin the story of how he acquired it however he wished once the mortal was gone. None of the hidden guard around him would dare say differently than he did, and there was a high chance he would kill the servants to keep them quiet. Royals go where they choose, even more so when they design their own fate. Her words didn't feel all that important. She didn't feel the title even fit her. She didn't realize how much further his version of the word reached than her own. She would someday be an elvish queen, but with the elves near gone, it wouldn't matter anyway. She still longed for her freedom, and felt that a better life couldn't be made from a throne alone. The demon barely listened to her words. In his mind, she was just a longer-lived, more annoying mortal anyway. There was something still bothering the human. His own integrity forced him to speak up, and this would be one of those times. If demons were half as competent and loyal as they were all that time ago, it would be the one who slayed Grey Neral in your position now. Demons abide by power above all, and your blow was nothing compared to his. The demon insisted he wasn't trying to kill the mortal, but the truth was he was still angry the strike hadn't landed in the first place. The human was standing as proof. He was forced to accept the mortal was stronger than he was, and he wanted to try to save face the best he could. Aelynn was already ignoring the demon for the most part. She was tired of this herself. Something about it was familiar and possibly not in the best sense. Demons who talked too much tend to be plotting more, and she didn't wish to be a part of whatever he was working on. Demons and mortals always seemed a bit too similar to her. The ones with the power had not earned it, and rather took to arrogance as a shield. If anything, she was long beyond tired of that. The demon tried one last time to convince her to turn from her path, despite her confidently following this mortal out. He told her that following him would end in her death. Her words were more of a surprise, though. Death isn't as bad as losing your soul. She knew there was a final end, a death that could no longer be escaped. Her deaths had been so swift in this lifetime, replacing her body so quickly it hardly even mattered to her anymore. True death had been denied to immortals for so long that they seem to have forgotten it even exists. She wasn't about to turn back. If anything, the human was becoming more and more interesting to her. But as she realized what he said, she had to ask him about the death of that demon lord. It had been so long ago it felt impossible for the mortal to have been involved. He told her to just walk. If anything, his mind was elsewhere. He knew the portal altar had to be nearby. The layout of that tower wasn't all too different from any of the others. He didn't mind the attention. If anything, part of him enjoyed it. However, he was closer than he had been in a long time, and he didn't want to allow the distraction. She decided to follow him, asking him to show her the way. His past seemed almost as mysterious as some of her own. If anything, it intrigued her. There was something else, too. Every time she let herself think on it, she felt there was nowhere she belonged more than near him. This journey had brought her to thinking about herself more. She knew she was ancient blood, that her people had been elves that posed as humans for many ages. She was the one who broke tradition to refuse to hide herself outside of their village. Still, the more time she stood in these new realms, the more she realized that maybe she knew nothing about herself at all. She only knew the stories she had been told. Being around these areas, though, it reminded her, despite her history in the demon realms, these were places she could never recall walking in this world. The two had traveled a distance through the tower before arriving at the new portal location. They both had a brief moment to notice the view. There appeared to be an old, dried lake bed, but it seemed like nothing else was nearby. Despite the strange beauty of the barren outside world, Arden was determined to get things moving again. They approached the arc stone altar and activated it. Unlike the previous altar, this one seemed to sparkle with golden white light, nearly blinding against the shadowed darkness of the current area. All that the man had to say to Aelynn was that she should not stray. As she walked through the portal, she was honestly relieved. The other side was blinding at first, then her vision settled on an old stone wall with vines upon it. Things here seemed to be in rather good repair compared to where they'd left. Well maintained and almost too clean for her liking. The energy was entirely different, and the sensation was nearly overwhelming compared to where they'd been before. She couldn't explain it. This place was where old energies dwell, where the ground tried to speak without words. This realm felt similar to the last, and yet somehow equally different in all too many ways. While she was still taking in the sight, the mortal started across the bridge they were standing on. The energies were always a bit overwhelming. These realms tended to be crowded and more filled with life. Quite a contrast to the demon realms. While demons were well known to compromise, angels were less so. The human took a breath through his nose before muttering, "Be ready." The marbled citadel in the distance was probably partially illusion, or perhaps it had been changed to better match with the landscape. All he knew is this wasn't about to be easy. Dealing with angels never was. Aelynn wasn't sure what it was. She found her eyes locked on the building, gently rubbing her arms as if to comfort herself. This place was making her uneasy. She finally tried to drift out of her thoughts by asking if they should maybe get cleaned up. Arden said she was probably cleaner than anyone who resided here. Still, he didn't speak much. He decided to pull out a flask of water to drink from as they walked. He knew there was much more coming than she probably realized. The idyllic landscape was far from the nature of the actual people in charge. Those people were depicted as statues carved into a nearby cliff. Angels past and present seemed to watch over the entire location. The cliffs themselves acted as great stone walls, forming a barrier around the area where they were standing. The bridges seemed designed to take a more leisurely stroll through the actual landscape. Still, they were moving faster now. People were increasing in number as they quickly moved over closer to the citadel. The woman finally asked if they were seeking an angel or one of the higher beings. Arden was a bit gruff in his response. "What's the difference?" If anything, he just wanted all of this to end. Their state was what drew the most attention. In a realm so perfectly clean, the two dirty and blood-stained warriors were a hard thing to miss. If anything, some drew away while others simply stared. Some averted their gaze, but most stayed a fair distance from these strangers in their land. I hate places like this. After they passed through a set of archways and a large wall, Aelynn motioned across the courtyard to the great gates ahead. I'm sure they think they know how powerful they are, while their people suffer instead. She was finding that same fire that hits her building up again. She wasn't sure if this was the voice of her own lifetime or another previous one. She didn't care. She didn't have freedom among her own people. She barely had it in their world, but this was finally a chance to change something. Beyond the gates is the lift to the grand hall. Suddenly it was clear she'd been here before, and it was the reason she was so discomforted by the entire place. She knew everything, the holding cells, the council halls. The entire place was rapidly mapping out in her mind, and she closed her eyes in the attempt to slow it. The hall flowed with blood in the past. It might be time for it to do it again. The phrase didn't even bother her. It was probably the older one within her speaking again. Another voice spoke in her mind. That male again. All you need to do right now is survive. The rest will make sense later. She hated that this voice felt more comfortable than where she was. Something in her was building as they grew closer to the citadel, something that wanted to destroy everything where it stood. She hated it all this much. She could understand why Arden was so driven. He must have experienced far more of these realms than she had, and with the way they treated humans, she could only imagine how that went for him. Arden was a little confused by her awareness of this place. That is until he recalled that she'd spoken as another earlier. That woman would have known this area all too well, even if she only admitted it a few times. When he swung the gates open, a large mechanism clicked, and then the great gears could be heard moving. He would have been able to open these with ease, but the mechanism is clearly something Dwarven built to assist weaker travelers. Aelynn hated everything about this place, and the two angels who stood before her only made her want to hate it more. It was clear they wanted nothing to do with the pair. They were filthy and clearly there for nothing good. The two demanded to know what they wanted in this place. The first was a knight with golden hair and emerald eyes. Both were overly gaudy, in golden armor with white clothing. The second knight had hair that was white with golden eyes. The first wore a sword. His companion had a spear strapped to his back. After some banter, it was clear that the human wanted to speak to the Grand Inquisitor, who still used his human name, Carlyle. It was the closest he could come in human tongue to his original name, without confusing the poor creatures. Arden stated that he kept in his hold the head of the demon lord Greyneral. Despite that, they were told that they should clean up. Even if they wished to see the Inquisitor, they would have to wait until the time was right. There is no have to in a situation like this. I'm fairly sure anyone who could have defeated that demon lord would be more than able to set his own schedule, by pleasant means or otherwise. Aelynn spoke up before Arden could. It seemed she was getting bolder since coming here, something he wasn't sure if he appreciated or not. He couldn't say he hated it, but these random encounters were slowing progress. All of the higher beings like to talk far too much. Tell the Inquisitor that I will be there shortly. I care nothing for his schedule. With that, he pushed past the guards and towards the lift. Aelynn quickly followed. As the two great doors closed, she looked over the panel. When she raised her palm to it, she was slightly surprised to see that it responded so quickly. A beam of light scanned her hand, and almost instantly the entire panel began to flicker. The great door closed as the two were left to wait for the lift to find its destination.